I am Alfreda Tillman-Bester, and I am Special Counsel for Human Services at Southern University Law Center. That means that I run an anti-poverty program, identifying public policy that impedes people from moving out of poverty. When I started law school, one of the first things that I was introduced to was to assure that I assert my authority for whatever it is that I'm talking about, because just saying that Frida said it doesn't mean a lot. So let me start with our founding documents. If you will allow me to read to you, and I promise I won't read to you much, but I'm going to read this to you because it's important. We, the people of the United States, in order to form a more perfect union, establish justice, ensure domestic tranquility, provide for the common defense, promote the general welfare, and secure the blessings of liberty to ourselves and our posterity. Do ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. And that's just the preamble to the United States Constitution, but here we go. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men and women are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men, deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Y'all, that means that the only power that any person who holds public office has is the power to be just. And that is only with our consent. Is with our consent. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive to these ends, it is the right of the people to alter it or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them seem most likely to affect their safety and happiness. Their safety and happiness. Let me start with a simple principle, a simple premise, that power-hungry autocrats and white supremacists have known for centuries. If you can control the reins of government, you can make public policy, constitutional or not, and you can control the money, law enforcement, the courts, and most importantly, the rights of the people. In other words, elections matter. We're here today to commemorate the courage and the hard, dangerous work of our forefathers, who literally put their lives on the line so that we wouldn't have to suffer the indignities and the indignities that our government facilitated, enacting a caste system of laws, quote unquote, to keep African Americans and poor people in their respective places. I honor the life and legacy of some of Baton Rouge's own, the Reverend Theodore Judson Jefferson, who was my pastor for 21 years, Mr. Johnny Jones, a newly minted, just graduated attorney back in 1953 who had gone to law school after serving in the United States Army, the lawyer who helped to facilitate the Baton Rouge bus boycott. A.Z. Young, my seatmate at Mount Zion First Baptist Church, he and his wife Dorothy. These are not anomalies to me, these are people that I actually knew. Mr. Willis Reed, who was an Army veteran and also a journalist. Attorneys Murphy Bell, Robert Eames, Etta K. Hearn, Gail Horn Ray, who happens to be here today. Raise your hand, Gail. Let the people see Gail Horn Ray. Robert Williams, who we lost 3 years ago. An NAACP lawyer who almost single-handedly litigated the right of African American children in Baton Rouge to have a quality education for over 30 years of the 47 years, yes, I said 47 years of an active desegregation lawsuit because bigots didn't want their little cherubs going to school with our children. Yeah, I said it. Robert worked without compensation for those 30 plus years. And all of those lawyers that I just named, from Mr. Johnny Jones to Gail Horn Ray, who's here today. When I graduated law school in embraced me and taught me and told me that the law degree that I had just earned and the admission to the bar that I just had to fight for didn't belong to me. They told me that it belonged to the ancestors and it belonged to the people who came after me, who would come after me. Thank you, Gail. Thank you. And to all of those people that I named that are not here today, some of them have passed on. Others are, listen, let me tell you something about civil rights work. We get a whole lot of thank yous. We don't get a whole lot of money. We get a whole lot of thank yous. But to whom much is given, of them much is required. I take that very seriously. And so do all of those attorneys that I just named. Attorneys Ernest Johnson, who y'all know as Dr. Johnson, who teaches at the law school, who was my law professor, who taught me trial advocacy, and Arthur Thomas, Pam Taylor Johnson, and Janice Clark, who thought it not robbery that the judges of Louisiana and America ought to look like the diversity of this country. Local NAACP presidents, George Washington Eames, Alvin Washington, Kwame Asante, Lamont Cole, Michael McClanahan, Byron Sharper, Eugene Collins, who's here with me on stage today. We have witnessed throughout the history of this nation white supremacist lawmakers, governors, mayors, and yes, judges, who were so skilled in misappropriating our government and gaslighting the public that they convinced poor white people that recently freed enslaved people that our demands for equal rights, which were enshrined in those documents that I just read to you all, convinced people that we were somehow making policy that was making it more difficult for them, and that we were somehow causing their lives to be made more difficult when we weren't making any decisions. Those decisions about paying them marginal wages or slave wages, those were made in boardrooms. They didn't have anything to do with us, right? Y'all don't believe me when I tell y'all that judges were some of the people who perpetuated this stuff, right? Well, let me just tell y'all. I'm going to tell it. Y'all may not invite me back, but I'm going to tell it this time. Dred Scott, 1857. He said that this was Justice Taney, y'all. He said that the Constitution didn't even contemplate us. He said that when the Constitution was written, that it considered us to be subhuman and inferior beings, that the white man was not bound to respect. I don't know if y'all watched that legislative session last week where we were asking to have representative government in our Congress. And without saying a word, the majority of the Louisiana legislature said that we were a subhuman and inferior being that had no rights that they were bound to respect. They didn't care what the Voting Rights Act said. They didn't care what the Constitution said or what due process and equal protection under the 14th Amendment said. They said they were not going to give us representative government no matter what that judge said. Yeah, but they got to see her again. Yeah. That was 1857. 1863, we got the Emancipation Proclamation. And we just celebrated Juneteenth, right? I told y'all that the Emancipation Proclamation became active in 1863. Slaves didn't know about it until 1865. 2.5 years later, they got 2.5 more years of slave labor out of the people in Galveston, Texas, out of the people in Texas, even after those people were free. 1896. Come on home to Louisiana, y'all. Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal, which was anything but equal, right? I remember growing up in Hattiesburg, Mississippi, where we had to wear our coats in class the whole time we were at school because they didn't have any heat at my school, right? And the books that we used, so many people, they used to put the names in the books, right? And so many people had used the books that I got, Eugene, that they didn't even have room to put my name in there anymore. They had to put another little sheet over the top so that they could start adding the names to it, right? I was in a session this morning that talked about the emotional and mental health of people who have suffered segregation. Didn't even think about it. I really didn't think about it. But there are so many people around me, people that were as bright, as capable, who had good families, who had to endure the indignities of state-sponsored racism. Think about that. State-sponsored hate. What was that y'all saw at the Louisiana legislature the other day? They used our money to tell us that we couldn't have representative government. Are you not tired of seeing these people co-opt the reins of government to oppress us? Time for a revolution, y'all. Time for a revolution. I didn't come to come. Time for a revolution. Thank you. Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas. That was 58 years after Plessy versus Ferguson. Thank you, Thurgood Marshall. Thank you. To all of those attorneys who worked on that, right? 58 years after Plessy, we got separate but equal is inherently unconstitutional in education, and that was used in everything after that, including as we get to the bus boycott, the Baton Rouge bus boycott that occurred in 1953 here in Baton Rouge, led by some of those people that I told you about earlier, Reverend T.J. Jefferson, pastor of the Mount Zion First Baptist Church, and Johnny Jones, that newly minted attorney who is a graduate of Southern University Law Center. We have a long and beautiful legacy of advocates at Southern University Law Center. The bus boycott here in Baton Rouge laid the foundation for boycotts of public transportation all over the nation, including the bus boycott in Montgomery, Alabama, that was led by Martin Luther King Jr. The bus boycott here in Baton Rouge lasted all of 6 days, from June 19th, 1953 to June 24th of 1953. The bus boycott in Montgomery that was predicated upon the bus boycott here in Baton Rouge lasted a little bit longer than that. Lasted from December 5th of 1955 to December the 20th of 1956. They shut that joker down. They shut it down, y'all. They used their economic power and the coordination of what was a real community, and they shut it down. You gonna treat us like inhuman, like we're inhuman? Well, we'll just stay off your buses. You need us to get to work? Better find you somebody else, because we can't get there. We don't have the transportation to get there. Or, guess what? The few black people, and let me not forget that there were white people who did the same, gassed up their cars, and they helped people get to work. It was a coordinated effort. We gotta learn how to coordinate again. We gotta learn how to work together again, right? Listen, God, I don't have time to talk to y'all about all the stuff I want to talk to y'all about. So let me just, Eugene is chomping at the bit here. If you guys think that nonsense about making America great again started in 2015, I got some land over in the Chapelaya that I want to sell y'all. They don't belong to me. It doesn't belong to me. That stuff started long ago. There's an organization called the American Legislative Exchange Council. You guys hear it called ALEC. ALEC was a coordinated effort. And they didn't just start it in 2015, they started it way before. There was a plan, and there was a plan that was worked. I'm not a conspiracy theorist, y'all. I'm a Southern University Law Center graduate, and I can see, right? The foundation was laid, and they worked it. They shopped legislation in every legislature that they controlled, and the things that they couldn't do at the federal level, they did it state by state by state by state. They did it city by city by city by city. We have to learn to fight back. We have to learn how to be the ones who say enough. We have to be the ones who say we're going to invest in our community, and we're going to fight for our children. I hope that if you don't hear anything that I say today, that you hear when I tell you elections matter. Elections matter. Because Barack Obama was elected, Judge Shelley Dick made the decision that the Louisiana legislature had violated the law when it did not give us representative government. A couple of weeks ago, she made that decision. But here's the thing. When we go to vote, you can't just vote for governor and not vote for, give them a legislature that's going to help them get things done. You got to vote all the way up the ballot and all the way down the ballot. God, I don't have time to tell y'all all the stuff I want to tell y'all. Okay, so let me just, 1954. Until 1954, the East Baton Rouge Parish School Board and all of the schools in the South operated segregated schools, right? Plessy versus Ferguson gave them the cover to say that they were separate but equal. But I just told y'all they didn't have any heat in my school. And I had to use old books that were worn out, and they usually had some tape on them. And then there was a little placard in there so they could put my name on it. So we weren't equal, right? So then came the Civil Rights Act of 1964. But before that, the Brown versus the Board of Education of Topeka, Kansas was filed, right? That case, y'all know Brown, the Brown case, right? Brown versus Board of Education. That case was decided in 1954. And I told you they said that separate but equal was not constitutional, that it violated the due process and equal protection clauses of the 14th Amendment. Civil Rights Act of 1964, Voting Rights Act of 1965. Voting Rights Act, there were two provisions there that were very important to us. Well, and let me just say three. All of it was important, but what we used was Section 2, Section 4, and Section 5. 1965. We were doing pretty good. People, yeah, okay, so y'all could vote. Some of y'all didn't. I'm sorry, Eugene, I just went there. Okay, could vote. Alec had a plan. So guess what? Shelby County, Alabama versus Holder. They had elected Barack Obama, y'all, in 2008. Those old boys had to do something. Shelby County versus Holder. What did that do? Gutted the Voting Rights Act of 1965. Gutted it. Meaning that no longer did jurisdictions that had a history of voter suppression no longer had to be pre-cleared, meaning that they had to get permission before they changed anything that had to do with voting rights. Shelby County said, well, that's not happening anymore. You know, people are not discriminating. We don't have any of that happening anymore. Okay, well, give me an umbrella and tell me to go out in the rain. I probably won't get wet. But if I leave that umbrella, this is the analogy that Justice Ginsburg used when she dissented in this opinion. You send me out in the rain without an umbrella, I'm going to get wet. You ask racists to draw lines that are representative of the people and the population of any place. They're going to draw it the way that they want to draw it, to make sure you don't have a voice. Because we don't have that umbrella of the Section 5 anymore. They don't have to be pre-cleared. So now, anytime they discriminate, y'all remember I told y'all that the desegregation lawsuit in East Baton Rouge Parish lasted 47 years? That's how long one case lasted. So give me Section 2. I'll just litigate. I'll use the public dollars, taxpayer dollars that y'all pay, and I'll fight y'all with it. Y'all know what I'm saying? Yeah, do y'all get this? These people have co-opted our money to oppress us, oppress our rights, to suppress us. And y'all, we just had a judicial election in East Baton Rouge Parish this past fall. We had an 11.9% turnout. 11.9. That means that 88.1% of the people didn't even bother to go vote. Y'all say y'all get injustice at the courthouse? I don't have time to tell y'all about everything I need to tell y'all about, so y'all invite me back, I'll come. Okay. I just heard over the weekend, April Ryan, you guys know April Ryan. April is a renowned reporter. April quoted, and I don't know who it was, so please forgive me when I tell you, she said, "You will be someone's ancestor one day, so act accordingly." You will be somebody's ancestor one day, so act accordingly. When your descendants ask you, what did you do when bigots decided that they were going to make America great again? When they decided in 2021, January 6th of 2021, that they were going to take their government back, even if they had to overthrow it in an insurrection at the United States Capitol. They were going to take their government back. I commit to all of you right here today that I will be able to tell my son and all of my grandchildren. I only got one son, y'all. I was busy. I'll be able to tell my son and all of my grandchildren, I'm hoping for at least 5, but he's a little slow, that I did everything within my power. I will be able to say that to my son without trepidation, and to my grandchildren. At the very least, I'll be able to tell my son and my grandchildren that I showed up and that I voted every time the polls open. I don't wait for election day. I vote during early voting. So if anything happens, I got 8 days. Choose my day, choose my weather. That's me. Elections matter. In the words of my civil rights hero, one of my civil rights heroes, Reverend, who was murdered by the Ku Klux Klan in 1964 in my hometown of Hattiesburg, Mississippi, for registering black folk to vote. If if you don't vote, you don't count.
Thank you. Y'all give it up for him. Give it up for him. To tell you a little bit about myself, I'm the current branch president of the Baton Rouge branch of the NAACP, as well as the director of social justice for the YWCA of Greater Baton Rouge. I'm a sociologist by trade. My background is primarily public health up until civil rights. I worked in public health for over 17 years. Worked for the Louisiana Department of Health and Hospitals, as well as I managed FQAC clinics for about 5 years. We're gonna jump into the Baton Rouge bus boycott. And I'm gonna walk you down a timeline. And I want you to pay attention to this, because we're gonna walk right down this timeline in a chronological order, and then I'm gonna bring you back to something. Early in 1950, independent black-owned buses were declared illegal in Baton Rouge, including the Blue Goose bus, Jelly Bean, and others. January 1953, bus fares were raised from 10 cents to 15 cents. February 11th, 1953, for the first time, Reverend Jefferson went to the city council to speak about the fact that there were empty seats on the buses in the white section, while the black people had to stand in overcrowded back of the buses. February 25th, 1953, City Council moves to approve Ordinance 222. Ordinance 222 stated that black people could fill up the bus from the back to the front, and white people could fill up the bus from the front to the back based on a first-come, first-served basis. March 19th, 1953, Ordinance 222 was in effect but ignored. Early June 1953, bus drivers were ordered to comply with Ordinance 222. Bus drivers manhandles a black woman rider who was sitting in the front seat of one of those buses. Willis Reed meets Jesse Webb Sr. June 13th, 1953, Reverend Jefferson tests law by sitting in the front seat of a bus. He carries a copy of the Ordinance 222 in his shirt pocket. June 14th, 1953, 2 bus drivers were suspended for not complying with Ordinance 222. June 15th, 1953, bus drivers strike for 4 days. June 18th, 1953, United Defense League meets and organizes the bus boycott in Baton Rouge. June 19th, 1953, bus drivers end the strike. Raymond Scott goes to a radio station, WLCS, and has the announcement of the bus boycott to read to the public. June 20th of 1953, the free ride system goes into effect. The first mass meeting was held at Mount Zion Baptist Church. Crosses were burned at Mount Zion Baptist Church and at Reverend Jefferson's home. June 21st, 1953, McKinley High School, at the mass meeting, money was collected to purchase gasoline for the carpool. At June 22nd, 1953, a mass meeting was held at the Memorial Stadium because of the enormous crowds that were attending the meetings. June 23rd, 1953, Reverend Jefferson calls off the boycott. There were conflicting views over this, so we're going to get to that. June 24th, 1953, Ordinance 251 is passed. It was considered a compromise, and we're going to get to that as well. September 1953, District Court Judge Holcomb dismisses the case. Jefferson does not appeal. In October 1953, Joe Howard was arrested because he sat next to a white man on one of those front 2 seats. In 1955, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. calls Reverend Jefferson concerning the plans that were used to coordinate the Baton Rouge bus boycott. Now that's the chronological timeline of how the bus boycott was organized from beginning to end. Now I want to get to what those young folks call the T, right?
Get to the T.
The first thing I want to tell you, before Rosa took a seat, before Dr. King had a dream, before Montgomery stood his ground, Baton Rouge was the first. 2 years before the Montgomery bus boycott got national attention, in 1953, black people in Baton Rouge led a quiet revolt. It would become the template. It was legendary in NAACP circles, and it influenced what Rosa Parks did. Baton Rouge stood up to white supremacy and won. Baton Rouge created a template for Montgomery, and not only that, it created a template for mass boycotts among black folks that was the first of its type. It was an inception of sorts. The Baton Rouge bus boycott lasted here in Baton Rouge for 6 days. In 1953, black people made up about 70% of the rides on the Baton Rouge Bus Company. The Baton Rouge Bus Company demanded that those city bus routes be monopolized. And as a result, black bus companies lost their licensing. The Baton Rouge Bus Company pledged equal services as a result. In the colored section, you were not allowed to sit in the white section. If a white person decided to sit at the back of the bus, that meant all the black folks that were at the back of the bus had to stand. So most black people, when they rode the bus in this town, had to stand. Now think about that for a second. You had to stand on the bus stop, you had to stand on the bus, and when you got to work, you had to stand also. When you got off, you had to stand on that bus stop again. You had to stand at the back of the bus because some white person decided to sit at the back, so all the black people had to stand, right? Then you had to get out and walk home. You left your house, that was the last time you saw a chair, and you didn't get the chair until you got back to your home. How many of us could go through that today? Governor Huey Long made Louisiana the most liberal state in the South for black folks. Now that don't mean much, when you think about the time period, right? That don't mean nothing at all. But by the numbers, he did. The Longs believed in separate but equal, but they also believed in helping the poor because they were poor. They came from poor standards. Louisiana had the largest block of black voters in the South. Baton Rouge was also at this time on the doorsteps of political power. Why? Because Scotlandville and historic South Baton Rouge and a responsible, sizable black middle class had developed strong community leadership. And you want to know who centered that strong community leadership? Who was the anchor of developing that strong black middle class? Southern University. Southern University was a strong anchor for producing a prominent black middle class, and they made Scotlandville and historic South Baton Rouge economically dependent. But see, even with those standards, it took bold leaders. And before the boycott, let me go back to before the boycott. Martha White decided to take a seat on a bus here in Baton Rouge. See, we will hear the story of Rosa Parks. We will hear the story of Claudette Colvin, but rarely do we mention Martha White. Anybody know why? Anybody know why? It's because historically here in Baton Rouge, we had some Negro leaders sell out this movement. And even though some may debate that, and I'm going to explain that in just a little bit, but we never reached the national prominence that we were supposed to because not everybody agreed with 6 days, and I'm going to tell you why. As a result, T.J. Jefferson met with the bus leadership. T.J. Jefferson was a bold new leader. He was new to this city somewhat, right? And he met with the city council at that point to establish Ordinance 222, which was basically what I explained earlier, a right to first come, first serve. Now, bus drivers refused to allow the ordinance for 3 months before the driver was suspended. So even though Ordinance 222 went into effect, bus drivers still decided that they were not going to follow it.
Sound like the
At that point, a driver was suspended, which sparked a walkout from the drivers' union. The courts, Judge Fred LeBlanc, deemed that the Ordinance 222 violated the separate but equal laws as a result. As a result, it galvanized the black Baton Rouge community and a powerful black middle class and a powerful black church community that had developed political muscle. They formed the United Defense League and made Reverend T.J. Jefferson the president. Black Baton Rouge, as a result, decided to have an organizing meeting because they got fired up when the judge declared that this Ordinance 222 was not legal. They had a meeting and decided to go out that night after the meeting and knock doors and make phone calls. Like most of us who don't want to wait till the next week or the next month or maybe even like the next year, this group met and decided that they were going to start working that night because they were calling the bus boycott the next day. Now imagine what that took. With all of our tools today, social media, all of our iPads, all of our Mevo cameras, none of us could move that type of crowd in overnight. It wouldn't even be possible today. Our grandparents done it with pencils and pens and sneakers. And we have even more tools and can't seem to move 50 people together in a month. But like my elder said here, if you don't like what I say, just don't invite me back.
Tell it today.
They organized rides. And most black folks were ready to walk. Don't get it twisted. They say, oh, we're going to walk because remember, this wasn't the black Baton Rouge that you think about in 2022. This black Baton Rouge had pride. So you ain't going to treat us like this because we got a little money too. We'll walk first. The car drivers picking up the riders couldn't be paid because they weren't licensed. So churches held services and took up collections to pay for gas. Horatio Thompson, who owned a black-owned gas station, provided the gas. Think about what that took. Think about what connectivity in the African-American community had to exist for these things to take place. See, then the United Defense League Secretary, a name that we don't talk about enough, Raymond Scott, who was a black tailor here in town, made the most courageous announcement of the movement. He went to the most popular radio station and told them that the bus boycott was in effect. Don't ride the bus, and we're going to schedule rides for you at this time. At that time, it could have got him killed. But see, there are names that we leave out because they didn't sometimes meet the bill that we were expecting black leaders. They won. Make no mistake about it. But history largely forgets this movement because in some ways we didn't win, and I'm going to explain that. The bus boycott began and had an almost immediate impact. 6 days into the boycott on June 17, 1953, the Baton Rouge Bus Company was on the verge of collapse. The person in charge even said, hey, we're not going to be able to maintain this. We're going to have to shut down operations. In a move that angered many black people in Baton Rouge, Reverend T.J. Jefferson struck a compromise with the city council and the Baton Rouge Bus Company. They developed a new ordinance that only assigned seats for black and white riders and actually had fewer black seats as a result. That's why you don't hear about this movement much, because people in Baton Rouge in the time period didn't see it as a win, especially after Montgomery, because we got to see what we could have got.
That's right.
They won, but they didn't win. Jefferson compromised with the Baton Rouge Bus Company on his last legs. Some said he sold the movement out, and others said, heck, that was the best we could do.
Yeah.
And only history knows that truth. Some black folks still walked, even after the boycott ended, they walked in protest to Jefferson.
Yep.
The movement didn't exactly walk away with nothing, though. Let me tell you about how. See, Reverend Jefferson, who has a very complicated history in Baton Rouge. Let's look at why. Crosses were burned in his front yard. See, we can say what we would have done, but we ain't never had a cross burned in our front yard, right? I ain't never had to worry about my kid looking outside the window and seeing a cross burning outside of his window. So it's easy to say what Eugene would have did or what Eugene wouldn't have did, but the cross wasn't burning in my front yard, right?
Say it.
So if I'm going to hold him accountable, I got to speak him up too, right?
There you go.
See, this was the most significant movement of its sorts ever. They were operating without a blueprint. Got to think about that for a second. When we want to start something, what's the first thing we do? Start reading. We start looking at other movement. We start looking at similar things. We start looking at the data. These folks moved with sheer will. We don't have a right to judge them, Because we do less with Mevos, laptops, iPads, and cell phones, right? It is beyond my right to judge that. And I got to imagine that this was a very difficult position for a minister to be in the South, right?
Yep.
Got to imagine that. It almost certainly would have meant death for Reverend Jefferson if he had kept going.
Yep.
He knew it meant death. So we can say what we would or wouldn't do, but are you ready to die for what you believe in today? Are you ready to have some folks come through your window and possibly cost your family home? So you got to understand that when you look at the full context of history, right? If Reverend Jefferson keeps going, he's probably Dr. King. But see, we must never forget the courage that it took him to stand up to begin with. I'm going to tell you the truth, whether you don't like it or not. See, from this point on, as we talk about the outcomes, white Baton Rouge sought to destroy black Baton Rouge's power. See, after this point, Southern changed, right? I ain't saying that's a bad thing, but it changed.
Tell the truth.
Churches changed. I'm not saying that's a bad thing either, but they changed. Communities changed. I ain't saying that's a bad thing either, because I know some of y'all enjoy living in Gonzales and Prairieville, right? But communities changed. The NAACP changed. Heck, some of these new fights that this new young president fighting got some of these old members like, oh, hold on, brother. Like, we can do that next year. I'm just keeping it real. The NAACP changed. Folks identified the power of Scotlandville and historic South Baton Rouge, and that a large, strong black middle class had quietly built a monster here in Baton Rouge. See, for the first time, those quiet black folks that were quietly building this machine that could move against everything, they let folks see what it was, right? As a result, those institutions came under economic attack almost instantly. Some might even say they're still under attack, right? The black middle class in Baton Rouge now reaches to Ascension and Livingston and is no longer centralized. This movement showed black folks what was possible through organizing and black unity. Locally, it showed black people compromise and exposed our strengths. We were the test dummy, and we paid for it too. Scotlandville paid for it. Historic South Baton Rouge, which some of y'all call Old South Baton Rouge now, but if you go down to South Baton Rouge, you bet not call those people Old South Baton Rouge, because they might slap the hell out of you. We paid for it. Those communities have experienced decay in recent years, when they were probably at one point the strongest, most vibrant black middle class communities in this state.
That's right.
Scotlandville, which is a whole nother story for a whole nother day, is probably a city today if our leaders didn't sell that out too. The movement, however, benefited. Even though it didn't exactly achieve the results that we wanted here in Baton Rouge, it was a blueprint for Montgomery that changed what black folks and the situation of black folks was throughout this country. It was developed on the backs of black people here in Baton Rouge. And guess what? No matter how we feel about Reverend Jefferson, no matter how we feel about these other leaders or whatever else, right? That's almost what we sign up for. When you say you want to do civil rights work, you almost sign up to lose so that other folks can win.
Tell the truth. Tell the truth.
So us judging any character in their movement, some might call hypocritical, right? See, as we talk about this movement of the bus boycott, see, we leave out names like Martha White, who, let's just say it, if she was a man, there would be a statue of her downtown. We can have the argument about Claudette Colvin, but Rarely, most of us don't even know who Martha White is. How many of us knew who Martha White was before today? I know you did, Chancellor Pierre. But the reality of the bus boycott is that it's a complicated history. And see, that's the story we don't tell enough. That's the honesty we don't give our youth, is that we had questions about the Baton Rouge bus boycott, and that's why nobody knows about it. I know they got street names up there, but not all of us agree with the name that went up there. And that's the honesty we have to give our youth.